Beneath the blazing sun of the Ethiopian highlands, a procession winds its way through the streets of Lalibela. Priests dressed in white robes, embroidered with gold, carry umbrellas of crimson and emerald. In their hands, wrapped carefully in cloth, they bear wooden replicas of something believed lost to the world, the Ark of the Covenant. Crowds kneel, chanting hymns that echo against the red stone churches carved straight from the earth itself. For the outside world, such processions are often dismissed as quaint rituals, relics of folklore, or worse, fake myths. Yet for the people of Ethiopia, this tradition carries the weight of thousands of years, older than many branches of Christianity itself. And here lies the paradox. So much of what is dismissed as superstition or invention, fake myths that surround African Christianity, are, in truth, the echoes of ancient traditions that not only predate Christianity, but, in many cases, shaped the way Christianity itself was practiced on the continent. What happens when we look closer? When the lines between myth and memory, between Christianity and African spirituality, begin to blur? To understand this, we must travel back nearly 2,000 years to the banks of the Nile, where the kingdoms of Nubia and Axum rose to greatness. Long before Europe would claim Christianity as its own, Africans were already blending ancient traditions with the teachings of Christ, creating a faith both familiar and profoundly different. One of the most striking examples lies in the story of the Ark of the Covenant. For centuries, scholars outside Africa dismissed the Ethiopian claim that the Ark was brought to Axum by Menelik, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. It was labeled a pious legend, no different than medieval fables of relics hidden in monasteries across Europe. Yet when we peel back the layers, we find something remarkable. In Axum, the claim is not merely belief, it is ritualized into the fabric of Ethiopian Christianity. Every church houses a tabut, a consecrated replica of the Ark, without which the church itself cannot exist. Whether or not the original Ark rests in Axum's chapel of St. Mary of Zion, the tradition has preserved one of the oldest continuous connections to the biblical covenant anywhere in the world. What was dismissed as a fake myth turns out to be a living continuation of a uniquely African interpretation of sacred history. But Ethiopia is only one piece of the story. Travel northward to the Nile Valley, where Christianity first spread into Nubia by the 6th century. Here, churches rose not atop Roman ruins, but on the foundations of much older temples. In Nubia's Christian art, Christ is often depicted not with pale features, but as a dark-skinned king, adorned in crowns that resemble those once worn by pharaohs. The imagery reveals something profound. Christianity here was not a foreign import. It was woven into African traditions of kingship, divine rule, and cosmic order. And then there were the stories carried across West Africa. Among the Yoruba, long before Christianity arrived with missionaries, rituals of baptism already existed in the form of water purification ceremonies. When Christian baptism spread, it was not a foreign act. It resonated with older ideas of cleansing and spiritual rebirth. Missionaries often dismissed these parallels as coincidences, or worse, distortions. Yet what they overlooked was continuity. The Yoruba did not merely adopt Christian rites, they recognized in them an echo of their own sacred traditions. Revelation comes again when we turn to Egypt, the cradle of Coptic Christianity. In the deserts of the 4th century, monks retreated to caves, seeking solitude and communion with God. Their practice of fasting, renunciation, and meditation was revolutionary to later Christian traditions. But listen carefully, and you will hear whispers of something older. These same deserts had, for millennia, been home to Egyptian priests who withdrew into silence to commune with the gods. The Christian monastic movement, often credited to figures like St. Anthony, may well have drawn inspiration from these ancient African practices of sacred retreat. What was dismissed as eccentricity became one of Christianity's most enduring legacies. The thread does not end there. Consider the practice of incense. In Catholic and Orthodox churches today, clouds of frankincense rise during worship, symbolizing prayers ascending to heaven. Yet in Africa, the burning of incense was never simply symbolic. In ancient Kush, Ethiopia, and across the Horn of Africa, frankincense and myrrh were central to spiritual offerings, traded along vast caravan routes that stretched into Arabia. When Christianity absorbed this practice, it was not borrowing from distant lands, it was building upon centuries of African ritual. To call this a Christian invention is to erase the African roots that gave it life. There is another revelation hidden in plain sight: the veneration of saints and martyrs in African Christianity. In many Western traditions, this practice is often misunderstood, dismissed as idolatry or myth-making. Yet in Africa, the honoring of holy figures resonates with much older customs of ancestral reverence. Among the Igbo, the Akan, the Yoruba, and countless others, the spirits of the departed are not gone. They remain protectors, intercessors, guides. When Africans embraced Christianity, this ancestral worldview merged seamlessly with the veneration of saints. What outsiders saw as a distortion was in truth a continuity, a merging of two sacred ways of remembering the dead. And then comes perhaps the most startling connection of all: the resurrection itself. Across African traditions, the theme of death and rebirth is everywhere. In the Nile Valley, the story of Osiris told of a god who died, was dismembered, and rose again, bringing life to his followers. In West African cosmologies, deities like Ogun and Shango embody cycles of struggle, death, and renewal. When Christianity proclaimed the resurrection of Christ, it resonated deeply with African cosmologies that had long embraced the idea that death is not the end. For some, this was proof that Africans misunderstood the gospel, overlaying it with their own myths. But in reality, it was the opposite. They recognized in the story of Christ a truth their ancestors had always known. These are not coincidences. They are not fabrications. They are the threads of Africa's deep spiritual heritage, woven into Christianity in ways that the outside world often refuses to see. When missionaries arrived, many labeled these connections as heresy, as fake myths that diluted the purity of the gospel. But history tells us another story. Christianity in Africa was never simply imported. It was transformed, rooted in ancient traditions that predate Europe's claim to the faith. And so we are left with a question that lingers, haunting and unresolved. How many of the so-called myths we dismiss today are actually the surviving echoes of a much older truth? What hidden traditions still lie beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? Africa's role in shaping Christianity is not a footnote, it is a foundation, a reminder that what we often call myth may in fact be memory. This is the story the world forgets. This is the history left off the map. If this journey has opened your eyes to the hidden connections between Africa and Christianity, join us as we uncover more forgotten legacies of the past. Like, comment, and subscribe to History Off the Map, and step with us into the shadows where myth and history meet.